First off, tell me, what have you seen happen in the last couple of days here at this conference?
Wow, that is a big question. I think we've seen, this might sound a little extreme, but I think we've seen the beginning of a revolution in the addiction field. We have had an amazing response from the presenters who've just brought incredible information, from the audience who's been incredibly engaged, and then the conversations about how they're going to bring this into their programs. And then we've launched this new consortium, Matrix, that is going to really, in a more fortified and organized way, bring this message of males' addiction and trauma into the field.
It's not as though those things haven't always existed, but they have kind of been on the back burner. People, as the PhD I just spoke with, people just don't talk about male sexual abuse or male issues within the context of therapy.
Yeah, so there's a great irony. 70%, upwards of 70% of the people who are engaged, particularly in addiction services, are men.
Right.
So the idea that we haven't given a lot of focus to men's unique issues is really, it's interesting and ridiculous at the same time, but it's part of what I refer to as just it's been invisible because the field originated and was created by men. Right. And so as special population services developed, there was always an assumption that what we were doing for men was enough. And so until men have really recently started calling for and even almost demanding that we put attention onto this, it really has been given short shrift for the most part. There have been some incredible leaders like Dr. Mick Hunter, like Terry Real, Dr. David Wexler, Dr. Alan Berger, many others, David Powell, who we recently lost, who for the last 30 years have been trying slowly to bring that message, but there was never enough of a tipping point. I think we're approaching the tipping point.
Talk to us a little bit about David Powell.
David Powell is an amazing man. I had the good fortune of getting to know him over a period of time, and he even stepped into my life, as he was often doing with younger men in the field, in a mentoring role. Just incredibly committed to bringing the message of addiction and recovery to the world.
Right.
His international impact cannot be overstated. And at the same time, he was one of the early people banging the drum about men's issues. He, Merle Fossum, Craig Knockin, John Friel, and a couple of other men wrote books, Ernie Larson, wrote books that are, many are out of print, but we're focused on men. So David was able to be involved in some of the seminal moments that we've had in the last 3 years towards this movement. It was a great loss last year.
Of all the things you've seen, not just at this conference, but in the year of 2014, now that we're really getting close to the end of the year, what is the most surprising thing that you've seen this year?
It's interesting. In many ways, this conference happening still, we talked about it last year and that it would happen. It's certainly been a vision and a dream of mine to see something like this. Mm-hmm. So in many ways, this and the response has been quite amazing. That's it for the addiction field. We've got a long way to go before people genuinely get how critical the issue of gender is to us doing effective treatment. We're inundated with conferences that deal with, I think, a lot of things that are secondary to the impact of gender. But in our larger society, there's an incredible shift in the conversation about men. The series that NPR did, the conversation that's been opening up as a result of the NFL abuse stories, many different aspects. So I would say I'm intrigued in an ongoing way over the last several years about how much this conversation of masculinity is happening.
If you had to comment on the recent goings-on in the NFL, what would your comment be?
Well, I mean, I think, it's actually a core part of what I talk about. We put these men in these hyper-masculine environments, and then we expect them to just leave it on the field. We tell them that in order to be successful, you have to be super aggressive. You can't show emotion. You have to really downplay or even dismiss connection. You have to be very, very tough. All of those aspects get trained into an individual. When you add trauma on top of it, you then put them in situations where they're supposed to just turn all that off after years of having that ingrained. And now we're starting to talk seriously about the trauma that comes in the process of learning sports. How traumatic it is for men, from their coaches, from the assistant coaches, from other team members, the bullying. All of that is fundamental to our ideas of masculinity and how we have not helped men make transitions in various areas.
And if you had to give an overview of what you'd like to see happen in the future, what would that be?
Well, I mean, I think everything's about awareness. So the goal would really be that, my hope is that every male sports team could have somebody who really kind of opens their eyes to this conflict, to this tension, and then supports them through it. It's not enough to say, hey, let's get you some couples counseling, because most of the couples counseling still doesn't get gender. And so and if we demonize these guys, call them abusers, call them perpetrators, when they're literally almost doing the exact same behavior they're rewarded for doing on the field and given millions of dollars for an adulation, until we can help them navigate that unconscious dichotomy and conflict, I think things are starting to rupture, and I think it's actually very positive, but there's going to be a lot of pain before.
And until people start talking about it, Dan, there is no healing.
Without question, until people start talking about it honestly.
Right.
It's one thing to talk about Adrian Peterson and the other folks, and maybe even talk about the history of discipline in the African American community, or to talk about different things. But I've heard very few people talk about the grief that Adrian Peterson has over losing a son. Where was he supposed to deal with that grief? How was he supposed to deal with it? Who helped him in dealing with it? What about the other folks? I don't know anything about their history, but I would bet $1 million that there's trauma in the background. And the scary thing is that depending on how everything shakes out, this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as these stories coming out. My hope is that they will see the light of the day, but if we can't do it in a compassionate way and in a really aware way, it's going to be a mess.
And talk to me about things that I forgot to ask you. What did I forget to ask you that you want to get out there?
Well, I mean, I think a big focus of mine has been really advocating for the field and for programs to get serious about how we deal with men and trauma. That's been a passion of mine, and I don't think we can talk about it enough. I don't think we can support programs in looking at it enough, and I would even love at some point to see some accountability around that, because I think it's a
What would that look like, Dan?
Criteria, measures, outcome criteria
Assessment
connected
tools
to,
of sorts
well,
that-
absolutely, implementing assessment tools and certain service strategies, which is a big part of what I do for programs.
Right.
But then also on the back end, having certain goals and objectives or outcome standards that people have some accountability to show that they're taking it seriously and they're not just doing another kind of perfunctory implementation of the newest fad.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think the other thing that I'm incredibly passionate about, and it's connected to my recent book, A Man's Way Through Relationships, is really supporting men in creating healthy relationships in light of the fact that so much of our training is around not doing relationships, not how to not be in a relationship, right. About disconnecting, about not being vulnerable, about not sharing our feelings, and then we're asked to get into these situations. And I think that the most challenging aspect is that every man I know genuinely wants to be in that situation,
right.
But nobody has really shown him how. And then certain things can happen in that crucible that has a man acting out or making errors or acting in a way that doesn't communicate love, and it's so easy to misinterpret that. So that's a huge banner that I'm waving now, based on my personal experience and based on what I see happening in the recovery community, and really, quite honestly, in our larger society as well. The expectations for men in our relationships have changed dramatically.
Yes.
The support for men in meeting those expectations have changed little.
Have changed. Anything else?
Am I allowed to plug?
Sure.
Sure. Well, if people want to learn more about what I'm doing, they can go to dangriffin.com. They can contact me directly at dan@dangriffin.com. I always love to hear from people and their thoughts. And check out the books, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, A Man's Way Through Relationships, and the curriculum that we've co-authored with Dr. Stephanie Covington of Helping Men Recover.
Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely. Thank you.